Hello everyone, my name is Roke here, and today I'm going to dive into all things Season 1 for you. Most of what's coming you'd find in your traditional seasons, but there's a few mix-ups that you might not be expecting. As always, this video is going to be cut into chapters, so feel free to skip forward or back to make sure you get the most out of your viewing experience. That's it for this section though, so sit back, grab a snack, and let's jump right into all things Season 1. I'm going to start on the dungeon side of things, as I think that has the most impact overall so far. First off, the way that you experience seasonal dungeons is changing entirely. First off, it wouldn't be a Season 1 overview if we didn't talk about the dungeon pool itself. Season 1 will see the return of some beloved and controversial dungeons, and here they are. First off, we have Arakara, City of Echoes from the warwithin, then City of Threads, the Stone Vault, the Dawnbreaker, Mists of Tyrna Scythe from Shadowlands, the Necrotic Wake from Shadowlands, Siege of Borealis from Battle for Azeroth, and an old one, Grim Batol from Cataclysm. At the start of Season 1, Mythic Plus will not automatically be available. Instead, it is being pushed back a week to coincide with the release of Mythic Raid on September 17th. This will not be the case for Season 2, but this is how Blizzard has decided to approach the new expansion strat. So in the first week of the season, you'll have Heroic Dungeons and Mythic Zero, except unlike before, you will be able to complete the 8 seasonal dungeons on these difficulties. Prior to this, Heroic and Mythic Zero applied to the expansion's dungeons as a whole, but this has now been changed to apply to the seasonal dungeons. When the season drops on September 10th, your random Heroic Dungeon queue will change, and you'll see a new random Heroic Dungeon warwithin Season 1 queue, which includes the entire dungeon pool for Season 1. This is a great way to get into the seasonal action early on and experience the new and old dungeons. Something to note is that there have been prior seasons where Mythic Plus has been capped the first week. I'm happy to announce that due to the changes to how Mythic Plus is released this season, there will be no cap on it when it releases the following week. Also remember that after the changes to Season 4 in Dragonflight, dungeons have gotten a lot harder, and you should temper your expectations when making that Week 1 push. Going for Keystone Master or some brazen score may sound great, but that all changes quickly when the boss backhands you in your first 2 key. Speaking of Mythic Plus, we also have some huge affix changes to talk about. Season 1 of the warwithin sees the return of a pseudo-seasonal affix that applies from the very start of keys at +2 and changes each week between 5 different variations. Let's go ahead and dive into each threshold for each affix. Right off the bat, in your +2 keys, you're going to see a new affix called Xal'atath's Bargain. This is the quote-unquote seasonal affix for the season, and it has 5 different variations to go over, changing depending on each week. First off, we have Xal'atath's Bargain Frenzied. This sees non-boss enemies become frenzied at 30% health, increasing their haste by 40%, but also increasing the damage that they take by 20%. Next up, Xal'atath's Bargain Oblivion sees Xal'atath herself manifest crystals from the void while in combat that can be absorbed by enemies or players for a nice damage buff. Then, Xal'atath's Bargain Devour sees Xal'atath tearing open rifts that devour the essence of players while in combat. This affix gives players an absorb shield and deals 2% max health every second. It can be dispelled by any dispel type, and if a healer breaks the absorb shield, all allies are healed for a good amount. Xal'atath's Bargain Ascendant sees Xal'atath rain down orbs of cosmic energy that empowers enemies or players while in combat. The orbs will start a cast, and successfully stopping all the casts will give players a large buff, granting haste and movement speed per stack for 20 seconds. However, any cast that successfully go off will buff enemies for the same amount, making them much harder to kill. Xal'atath's Bargain Voidbound sees Xal'atath summon a Void Emissary that empowers nearby enemies while in combat. While this emissary is up, they will constantly chant a dark prayer that increases nearby enemies' damage by 10%. This effect stacks, and they will continue to cast it until slain. Upon defeating the emissary, however, players will get a 20% crit chance buff that lasts for 20 seconds. That's all the variations of Xal'atath's Bargain for 2 keys. Now we're going to move on to the other affix levels. Starting at +4 keys, you will see a static affix with the return of Fortified or Tyrannical depending on the week. This is fairly standard. The only change you're noticing is that Fortified and Tyrannical pick up at +4 instead of the standard +2. More exciting changes on fortified and tyrannical in a minute though. Starting at plus 7 keys, you'll see a new permanent affix called Challenger's Peril. This affix kicks up the heat a little bit and makes sure that death feels punishing, as each death will now drop your timer by 15 seconds instead of the standard 5. Starting at plus 10 keys, you will now see the other fortified or tyrannical affix depending on the week, meaning that once you hit plus 10 keys, every single key will have both fortified and tyrannical on it, making for a challenging adventure. However, there is one more change going beyond plus 10, and that's going to happen at plus 12. A new change to Mythic Plus. At plus 12, all of your affixes are going to go static, with Xal'atath completely abandoning players and getting serious, replacing her Xal'atath's Bargain rotating affix with a new one called Xal'atath's Guile. This is a permanent affix that increases enemies' health and damage by 20%. This, along with Fortified, Tyrannical, and Challenger's Peril, means that once you hit plus 12 keys, your affixes will never change throughout the entire season. On every single key past this level, you can expect to see Xal'atath's Guile, Challenger's Peril, Fortified, and Tyrannical. Sounds scary? Yeah, because it probably is. Something of note here is that Fortified did see a 10% nerf, but in the grand scheme of things, I think it's still going to feel like a freight truck hit you every time you step into a key at this level. Now would be a good time to talk about rewards from Mythic Plus, as those thresholds have also changed. I'm going to have a graphic up here on the screen as I talk about it, but let's also run through it briefly together. Heroic Dungeons since Season 4 now have the pleasure of being in the Great Vault discussion, so we're going to start here. Completing a Heroic Dungeon in the preseason will net you some nice 567 gear, while after the season begins you can get 580 gear from them. They also unlock 593 vault slots for you, and moving into Mythic 0, you'll see 593 gear and some nice 603 gear in the vault. At this point, the end of dungeon and Great Vault rewards tend to fluctuate a bit, but the important one that I really want to point out here is Keystone levels 9 and 10. Level 9s will drop 613 gear on the hero track, while granting a 619 piece from the vault also on the hero track. The only way to get Myth gear in Season 1 will be to complete plus 10 keys and obtain them from your Great Vault. And there's also something to note that Myth track now goes to 6 upgrades, meaning that's an extra 30 gilded crests per piece to account for. Rough calculations show that fully gearing a character is going to take an extra 2.5 times the amount of crests, so choose wisely when sinking those crests into gear. There is also a nice caveat to this, which we'll get into later, however. Moving on from dungeons, I think it's time to hop into the raid content. Nerebar Palace releases when the season opens on September 10th for normal and heroic difficulties, with mythic difficulty releasing a week later on September 17th. A nice change for LFR is that the first, second, and third wings release subsequently through weeks 1 through 3, so no need to wait months to farm the raid on LFR. Season 1 also sees the addition of Story Mode, which allows you to take on the final encounter in the raid solo if you wish, and this mode releases alongside the Mythic release on September 17th. Nerebar Palace is an 8-boss raid with branching paths similar to previous raids, and here is the boss list. First, you have Ulgrax the Devourer, a nasty Nerubian who's ready to throw down with you. Then you move on to the Bloodbound Horror, which is a fun fight that will see you shift between planes of existence during the fight. After that, you'll progress deep into the palace to fight Sikran, a particularly proper Nerubian looking to sink you into the depths. Past that, you'll see a familiar face, as it's time to finally finish off Rashanan after his bold escape from the Dawnbreaker dungeon. Once he's dealt with you, it'll come face to Worm with Blood Twister Ovanax, in a fight that is sure to make you once again hate Worm bosses. Once you make it past them, you'll meet Nexus Princess Kaiveza in a complex and aesthetically pleasing encounter set within a void arena. Then, you must help settle rivalries in the Silken Court, as you face off against a multitude of bosses at once in what might be the best council fight to date. Then, to top it all off, you'll come face to face with Queen Ansurek herself, and you must vanquish her to free the Nerubians from their ill fate alongside Xal'atath. Loot drops in the raid vary between normal drops and very rare, a system that was introduced early on in Dragonflight to incentivize multiple clears of the raid. I've put up a chart up on the screen with the loot breakdown you can expect to see in each difficulty of the raid. There are 4 very rare drops in the raid, and here's where you can expect them. Sikran drops a necklace called Soreki Zealot's Insignia. It's a nice haste mastery neck with the added equip bonus of having a chance to restore mana to an ally when receiving heals, also granting both parties versatility as well for 10 seconds. Rashinan drops a back piece called the Wings of Shattered Sorrow, and is a nice crit haste piece with the bonus of taking damage greater than 25% of your health, also granting you a large avoidance bonus and increasing healing taken for 10 seconds. It also has the comical effect of reducing falling damage, which may be nice in the open world. Nexus Princess Kaiveza drops a stylish one-handed fist weapon called the Void Reaper's Warp Blade, and this is actually part of a 2-piece set that you can get from the raid. The fist weapon also has a bonus that gives your attacks a high chance to apply Queen's Bane to your target, dealing a high amount of shadow damage over 10 seconds, and completing the set in its entirety will net you a bonus, allowing it to always summon additional phantoms against enemies afflicted by Queen's Bane. Finally, Queen Ansurek herself drops a gorgeous crit mastery ring called the Seal of the Poisoned Pact. This is a nice crit mastery piece as well, and has a bonus which involves dealing damage, which has a high chance to grant you a dose of venomous potential. At 5 doses, you inject the stacks into your target to deal a high amount of nature damage over 3 seconds. It also has the added benefit of giving you an additional dosage if you deal nature damage, so this may be targeted for some specializations. That's it for the raid overview. Now let's dive into PvP. There have been some considerable changes here which I think will play out in favor of these players, so let's hop in. There's not much to go over here, but let's dive into it. The row for PvP in the Great Vault has been removed. While this may seem horrible at first, Blizzard has decided to instead grant players a much larger amount of conquest and allowing you to earn more of it throughout a season, as well as giving a weekly quest and currency that allows you to go to a vendor and buy the piece you want every week, instead of having to rely on RNG. This takes out a huge part of gearing for PvP and sets an equal playing field based on what you decide to purchase in those initial weeks. There's not much more to say for PvP here, but it is a really nice gearing change overall. Now, let's get into tier sets. I'm sure everyone can't wait to slip into their shiny new tier sets in Season 1, so let's get into exactly how you're going to get them. First off, the most reliable way to get tier gear is going to be in Nerubar Palace, as the tokens drop directly from the boss. You can obtain the helmet from the Silken Court, the shoulders from Rashinan, the chest from Bloodtwister Ovanax, the hands from Sikran, and the legs from Nexus Princess Kaiveza. Omni tokens make a return as well in the form of web-wrapped curios which drop from Queen Ansurek, and you can expect to get 2 of these each time you kill her, so plan around that, raid leaders. Another reliable way to get tier gear early on is via the Great Vault. Tier gear can be included in any of the 9 Great Vault slots, so make sure to fill out your Great Vault as much as possible for the best chance at tier gear. The last method of obtaining tier gear is for one piece specifically, but it is guaranteed and only depends on how fast you can get it. The Warwithin Season 1 Spelunker Supreme achievement grants you a Mark of the Spelunker Supreme that can be turned in for any heroic tier piece, and it requires you to accomplish one of 3 feats during Season 1. You can either obtain 1600 rated PvP rating, 2000 Mythic Plus rating, or defeat Queen Ansurek on Heroic or Mythic difficulty. This is a good way to get a guaranteed piece of tier to kick off or maybe finish your tier set. Now I'd like to take a moment to dive into Delves. This was mostly covered in my Delves overview video that went live yesterday, but I did just want to reiterate a few points. Important things to remember are that in the preseason, only tiers 1 through 3 are available, and once the season kicks off you can progress through all 11 tiers. Tier 8 is where the gear will cap off, netting you a 616 heroic piece in your vault. This will be a great way to gear throughout the season, so don't ignore those bountiful delves if you see them out and about. Perhaps the single-handedly most important aspect of Season 1 is going to be upgrading your gear. Things like how to get crests, how many you need, and other aspects will be incredibly important moving into the season, so we're going to talk all about it here. Blizzard has moved the bar for when you can get certain crests, so I'm going to briefly go over that now. Whelpling crests are now known as Weathered crests, and you can get these from heroic dungeons. Drake crests are now known as Carved crests, and you can now get these from Mythic 0 to Mythic 3 keys. Worm crests are now known as Runed crests, and you can get them from +4 to +8 keys. And finally, aspect crests are now known as gilded crest, and they can be obtained from anything above a +9 key. Something of importance to note here is that the last two bosses of Nerubar Palace will grant you additional crests equal to the next level. For example, the last two bosses on Heroic will now grant you 30 Rune Crest and 30 Gilded Crest. I'm going to start by talking about each upgrade track and any changes that may have come along with it. This is a great point to start at when talking about upgrading your gear, as it sets a precedent for the cost of things later on. Adventurer gear is going to be the most common type of gear you'll find, and it comes pretty much from all repeatable forms of content in the game. It ranges from item level 571 to 593, and is upgradable using Valor Stones and Weathered Crest. Veteran gear is the gear that you'll find from things like your weekly rewards, such as world events and Dornogal weekly quests, and this will be an important part of early progression. It ranges from item level 584 to 606, and is upgradable using Weathered and Carved Crest. Champion gear is gear that you'll find from world bosses and normal raids, and it can drop at the end of Mythic Plus dungeons, ranging from +2 to +6 if you'd like to farm it out. It ranges from item levels 597 to 619, and is upgradable using Carved and Rune Crest. Hero gear is gear that you'll find from heroic raids and Mythic Plus keys ranging from 7 and higher. It ranges from item levels 610 to 626, and is upgradable using Rune and Gilded Crest. Finally, Myth gear is found exclusively from Mythic raids and maxed out Great Vault slots. The item levels range from 623 to 639, and is upgradable exclusively using Gilded Crest, and this is the strongest form of gear in the game. For the final section of this video, I'm going to dive into crafted gear. Not much has changed here, but it's nice to quickly run through it just so you know what you'll need to plan around. Spark of Omens is your weekly spark that you'll be obtaining in Season 1. You can get half a spark each week in the form of Splintered Spark of Omens, and combining this with 250 Valor Stones will net you a Spark of Omens. Combining this with a certain number of crests will net you a nascent form of the crest, which can be used with an enchanter to create a craftable piece of gear. Starting off, blue crafted gear does not require a spark at all, and you can create it from item levels 577 to 590 depending on the quality, with just 30 weathered crests. Normal epic crafts simply require a spark and no crest at all, meaning you can take your spark to a crafting table and craft a piece of 593 to 606 gear strictly based off the quality that it can be crafted at. Heroic crafts require a spark and 45 rune crest, and scales from item levels 606 to 619 depending on the quality it's crafted at. Finally, mythic crafts require a spark and 60 gilded crests, making them the hardest pieces to make. They also receive a large item boost, ranging from item levels 623 to 636, making them only 3 item levels lower than the highest gear in the game. A good reminder is that any embellishments that you add onto the gear increases how hard it is to guarantee quality, and you can only wear 2 embellishments at any time, so make sure to plan around that as well. I know I didn't talk too much about world events in this section, and it's because the rewards on the beta weren't as fine-tuned as I think they should be, so I can't give reliable information on them. For the events themselves and what you can expect out of them though, I highly recommend checking out the guides from Mr. GM, as he has done a great job breaking them down to the core. For now though, I think that's pretty much all the info on Season 1 that I can distribute. I hope I didn't miss anything, and if you need any additional clarification or context, feel free to drop a comment down below. You can also reach out directly on our community Discord server, so hop in there and join in on the fun. For now though, that's it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you come back for some additional videos I'll have in the coming days before early access. Until then though, I'll catch you later. See ya!